Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. We reached Hadith 19. We're still in the unit about Iman. Bab min ad-dini al-firaru min al-fitan. This chapter is titled, It is part of religion to run away from tribulations, right? From the fitnas, from the tests. Now, a fitna is, we can loosely define it as a situation that in of itself is harmful to Iman. Right? In of itself is harmful to Iman, or potentially harmful to Iman. And so it is part of Iman that when you see something like that, you go away from it. You turn away. You not just go away from it, you run away from it. Right? And the Prophet, or Abi Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala an, أنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوشك أن يكون خير مال المسلم غنم يتبع بها شعف الجبال ومواقع القطر يفر بدينه من الفتن. Prophet ﷺ says, a time is approaching where the best wealth a Muslim can have is sheep that they follow to the tops of mountains and where it rains. And they're doing that to get away from the fitnas, right? To get away from these tribulations. Now, this hadith is specifically referring to, this hadith is referring to specifically the civil war that happened between Ali and Muawiyah, between the Muslims, right? It's referring to this. And we tend to analyze this situation by looking at just the camp of Ali and the camp of Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma. There was actually a third camp of Muslims, and that was the camp of a lot of the senior companions, including Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Mas'ud, Abu Hurairah, among others, Abu Bakr, etc. And a story goes that when the civil war was happening, one of the tabi'een, the second generation of Muslims, so this is somebody who met the Prophet, but he's living in the time of the companions, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. He was contemplating, what should he do? How should he engage the situation? Should he go with Ali? Should he go with Muawiyah? Right? And he was thinking about it a lot, and it was causing him an amount of anxiety. So he went to sleep and he saw a dream where somebody told him, go follow Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Be with the camp of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Radiyallahu ta'ala an. So the man wakes up. Where's Sa'd? Where's Sa'd? He's in Medina. He goes to Medina. Where's Sa'd? I'm looking for Sa'd. He finds Sa'd. And he says, Sa'd, this is what happened to me. Right? I was contemplating, should I go with Ali? Should I go with Muawiyah? And then I saw in this dream that the person said, go and follow you. What are you doing? So Sa'd said, do you have sheep? Do you have a herd of sheep? He said, yeah, I have some sheep. He says, get your sheep and follow me. Where did they go? In the countryside. Right? Why? Because Sa'd heard this hadith. He heard the Prophet say it. And he understood what it meant when the dispute and the civil war happened. Essentially, there are certain scenarios where you could avoid. There are things that are in your control, to enter or to not enter. Sometimes it's out of your control, right? When it's out of your control, now we get into the realm of ibtila. You're being tested. What are you going to do? For Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, he had to deal with it. He was the Khalifa, right? He didn't have the option of isolating. Muawiyah, the same thing. He's the governor of Syria. He can't just let it go. But there are many others who had that option. So for Ali and Muawiyah, this was an ibtila. There's no running away from it. For others, it was a fitna. They have the choice of engaging it or not. And for this type of fitna, where it's problems between Muslims, engaging in it simply adds fuel to the fire. In a civil war, picking a side simply adds fuel to the fire. And in a civil war, you want to calm it down. How do you calm it down? By disconnecting, right? This is exactly what Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas and many of the senior companions did. They disconnected, right? So what does this have to do with our iman? It's actually a very important part of iman, and that is the following. When you truly care about something, you preserve it. When you care about something, you preserve it. Let's just say you like plants. You like planting. That's just something you like. It's a hobby of yours, right? And you really like trees. Let's say orange trees, or let's say whatever, a strawberry tree. So you have the strawberry tree, or strawberries grow on trees, right? On the ground? Okay, not a strawberry tree. Let's just say an orange tree. Whatever, an orange tree. So you have this orange tree, and you take care of it, you water it, you put the special, what is it called? Fertilizer, and all of that. You know, day goes by you're waiting for the harvest, and alhamdulillah, now these oranges are starting to grow, and you can't wait to pick it and distribute it on your family and your friends and your neighbors and all of this. All of a sudden, you see that the amount of oranges they're decreasing. You find some oranges on the floor, and it's half eaten. What's going on? What do you find out? The squirrels are coming, right? Now you're very upset. Why are you upset? Because you really care about the tree. You care about those oranges. You want them. If you could care less about them, you could care less about these squirrels coming and eating it, right? So the fact that you care about the tree and about the oranges, naturally you are upset when something comes and harms it, hence the squirrel. Now what are you going to do? You're going to start putting things around the tree that will prevent the squirrels from climbing the tree and getting to the oranges, right? Is that a predictable thing that you're going to do? Of course, because you're trying to preserve the thing that you cherish, the thing that is valuable to you. Similarly, a believer who truly values their iman will preserve it, protect it from the things that can harm it, hence the fitnas. It is fitna that can harm your iman. So if you truly value your iman, then you will protect it. And now we understand why this is part of iman. If you don't care about your iman, then you're not going to protect it. And if you don't care about your iman in the first place, then how much iman do you really have? Conversely, if you do care about your iman, then you'll do what is necessary to protect it. Why? Because you care about your iman. Iman is something important to you. You want it. So part of iman is hastily running away from the fitnas, right? So when you look at the world today, there's fitna all over the place. All over the place. And so people who truly care about their iman will stay away from the places that could potentially harm their iman. Right? They will stay away from the places that could potentially harm their iman. We can give many examples. Like a person who cares about the iman is not going to go to a bar. Right? It wouldn't make any sense for somebody who cares about their iman to go, I'm just going to go to the bar and give da'wah. Right? I'm going to go call people to Islam. No. What's going to be in their mind is, you know what? That is a place that's potentially harmful to my iman, and protecting my iman takes precedence over relaying iman or calling other people to iman. Right? So it is part of iman to run away from the fitnas. Right? So the stronger a person's iman is, then the more conscious they are to that which harms their iman, and the more likely they are to run away from those places or from those things. But people who go about saying, my iman is strong and I'm going to challenge these things. Right? I'm going to go and I'm going to challenge it. What ends up almost always happening? They succumb to the fitna. They get crushed by the fitna. Right? Why? Because they disobeyed Allah and His Messenger. Allah and His Messenger say, if there is a fitna, run away from it. Get away from it. But somebody who says, no, I'm going to face it and I'm going to challenge it, They've gone against the advice and the command of Allah and His Messenger. So when they do that, Allah's tawfiq and His hifz is taken away from that person, and then they fall into it as a type of disciplinary measure from Allah to this individual. So it is part of Iman to stay away from the places and the people that cause fitna. Again, you can't always do that, right? If a person has a parent who's a source of fitna, you don't have the option of disconnecting yourself from your parents entirely. You see what I mean here? That is now an ibtila. It's no longer a fitna. You have to deal with it. Or maybe you are in a certain position, like Ali and Muawiyah. They had to deal with it. It's an ibtila for them. So a Muslim is conscious over what can potentially harm their iman, and they stay away from those places as much as they can. Now, we have to be moderate in understanding this. There are some people who are careless and they just go anywhere. That's bad. But the other side is that there are people who they overprotect themselves, thinking that they can shield themselves from broader society. And a lot of parents use this method in raising their kids. Right? They don't go anywhere. There's no TV at home. There's no internet. There's no phones. There's no going out. There's no going to the mall. There's nothing. It's always secluded, isolated Muslim groups where they socialize. Okay? That might work for the first 18 years of your child's life. But they have to go to college. Your shield is lifted. And now what do you find? These young adults who are going to college having to deal head on with the very things their parents were trying to protect them from. But the problem is they have no tools, no skills to deal with it. They have no idea what's going on. None whatsoever. Right? So we Muslims have to understand that although we are commanded to stay away from the fitnas, we are also commanded to engage society. It was not the style of the Prophet and the companions, alayhi salatu wasalam, wa radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, to be isolated from broader society. They engaged non-Muslims. They lived next to non-Muslims. They discussed with non-Muslims. They debated with non-Muslims, right? So we do have a role to be part of broader society, to present Islam and educate people about Islam. But these people who hyper-isolate themselves, seclude themselves from broader society, they too are going against a type of command from the Prophet ﷺ. Our role in life isn't to hide away in our homes and not to be visible in society. When that happens, then the shayateen have more room to work. This is a fact of the matter, right? So it is part of iman and healthy iman to understand that you are vulnerable, that you are weak, and you have your weaknesses. And therefore, we don't challenge fitnas head on. We try and run away from it, like the Dajjal. Right? When the Dajjal comes, what does the Prophet ﷺ advise us to do? He tells the companions, if the Dajjal comes when I'm around, I'll protect you from him. But if I'm not around, every person for themselves. Run away. Run away. Don't face it head on. Right? By the way, a side note, I just saw this, wallahi, just an hour or two ago. Among the hadith about the times of Dajjal is that if a society obeys him, he causes it to rain there. And if society disobeys him, he causes it not to rain there. Just today, I saw a video where in the Emirates, they're putting tens of millions of dollars researching how to move clouds and how to shift the what's the word? The drift. I think the drift or the draft, the pressure, because it rains when the water particles become big enough, heavy enough to where it actually falls, and that has to do with the different pressure in the air, right? So they're researching technology that when they see a cloud, they send airplanes there to manipulate the pressure to move it to the Emirates and to cause it to rain in the proper places. So you see that? It's pretty crazy stuff. But anyway, that's a side note. As a side topic. It is part of Allah's will to allow us to do that. If Allah didn't want us to do it, He wouldn't have given us technologies to do it. Right? So, subhanAllah. Anyway, so part of Iman is understanding that you are vulnerable. Be humble. Put yourself in place. Don't overestimate your Iman. Wallahi, you will be crushed. Right? So, run away from the fitnas. باب قول النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أنا أعلمكم بالله عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أمرهم من الأعمال بما يطيقون قالوا إنا لسنا كهيئتك يا رسول الله إن الله قد غفر لك ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر فيغضب حتى يعرف الغضب في وجهه ثم يقول إن أتقاكم وأعلمكم بالله أنا. This chapter is titled The Statement of the Prophet, I am most knowledgeable of Allah. Right? I have the most knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would command us to do something, then he would command us in accordance to what we are capable of doing. And not just capable of doing, capable of persisting in that action. Right? In other words, he would command us to do things that he knows it will be easy for us to do it frequently and throughout our lives. Right? But the companions radiallahu ta'ala anhum would look at the Prophet ﷺ and say, Ya Rasulullah, I mean, Allah has forgiven your sins. We're not like you. So maybe you have the luxury of not going above and beyond because you have already been promised paradise, but we haven't. So we feel the need to do more. Do you get the logic here? They felt the need to do more. In our times today, how would people say this? So, Ya Rasulullah, you could do more. We can't do that. The companions were, their perspective was completely different. It's like, Allah has forgiven you. We are concerned and anxious over whether or not Allah has forgiven us. So we want to do more so that we are more likely to be forgiven. Right? But when they would say this, the Prophet ﷺ would get very upset. He'd get very upset to where you can see the anger in his face. And he would say, I am the I am the most righteous from among you, and I am the most knowledgeable of Allah from among you. What is the Prophet ﷺ saying here? What does it have to do with our Iman? Right? In the previous hadith, we were mentioning that part of Iman is understanding your vulnerability. And therefore you run away from the fitnas. You don't challenge the fitnas. In humility to Allah and in recognition of the reality of your Iman. Don't overestimate it. Another part of that is to understand that Iman is not simply the external. It's not only about what you do and how much you do, but rather it is a huge part of Iman is the fact that you are applying that which Allah and His Messenger told you to do. Okay? Let me reframe that. Part of Iman is acting in accordance to the Messenger, not in accordance to what you think needs to be done. Alright? So, previous hadith, don't act in accordance to what you think you can do. Here it's saying, act in accordance, don't act in accordance to what you want to do, but rather in accordance to what the Prophet ﷺ told you to do. So you see the kind of the similarities but the difference? So the Prophet ﷺ, him saying, I am the most righteous from among you, and I am the most knowledgeable from among you, is telling us that there is no better image of Iman than the Messenger. So if you find yourself doing more than the Prophet, then are you better than the Prophet? Clearly not, right? Clearly not. So somebody who acts like the Prophet but does less quantitatively than somebody else, who has more iman? The one who acts in accordance with the Prophet ﷺ. So it's not simply an issue of how much you're doing or the sincerity behind what you're doing. It's also about who are you emulating. It is part of iman that we model our iman and our actions in accordance to the Prophet ﷺ. Anybody whose model of iman and lifestyle is not like the Prophet, then there is a reduction in their iman. There is a deficiency in their iman. But somebody who is trying their best to emulate the Prophet ﷺ does not go beyond that, then their iman is healthier than that previous person. Right? Inna atqakum wa alamakum billahi ana. I am the most righteous and I am the most knowledgeable of Allah than you. So iman isn't simply what you think is best. It's not simply I'm being sincere in what I do and that's enough. No, it is a combination of sincerity and it's also a combination of acting in accordance to the Prophet ﷺ. So more does not equate to better. Sincerity does not justify other actions. It needs to be sincerity and in accordance to the Prophet ﷺ. And from here, you get the very central aspect of Islamic understanding that the scholars from day one till now keep reminding the ummah of. And that is, we act in accordance to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So you always hear the sunnah of the Prophet and the sunnah of the Prophet. What's the sunnah of the Prophet? And we have to revere the sunnah of the Prophet. And let's discuss the sunnah of the Prophet. And you have these hadith compilations that are extremely important and central to Islamic scholasticism. Why? Because it is an attempt to understand how the Prophet lived his iman. Because that is the way of living iman. Anything different, there's a deficit or deficiency in iman. Right? So some of the lessons here is, number one, don't let the shaitan deceive you into the mindset of more is better. More is better. It's not necessarily the case. And the shaitan will try and use this against you. He'll come to you and say, you need to do more. Right? You need to have more salah. You're not doing enough. You're not doing this. And his goal is to try and wear you out, to where you feel you cannot do this anymore. You get burnt out, and then you slowly start to retract your iman. Right? So run away from iman, from the fitnas, because fitna can erode your iman, it can harm your iman. But also, conversely, doing too much iman can also erode your iman and break it. So you see how it goes both ways? Right? So that's one lesson. Number two, don't be naive when it comes to the actions of other people. Right? Don't be naive when it comes to the actions of other people. Some people will come and they pray and they pray and they pray, and dua and dua and dua, and they have the hijab, and they criticize other people, and they do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi an munkar. That's just externalities. Unless those actions are truly backed up with taqwa and sincerity, then it's meaningless, it's nothing. Right? So more does not mean better. And therefore, when I see somebody doing a lot of salah, that's not enough for me to believe that that person is a person of taqwa. Let's see how they act when something of their desires is presented in front of them. Let's see what they're going to do. I always hear stories, right? You go to Chicago community, for example. You go to the Chicago community, the Arab side, and it's like you're in the Middle East. Women are all wearing jilbab and the hijab, right? And it's just, I mean, you can go to drive-thrus and order in Arabic, no problem. And you think this is a society or a community that has way more taqwa than the SoCal community, right? Why? Because the appearances are so stark. But you will find that the same people who have these external symbols of taqwa do a lot of things that you sit there scratching your head and you say, what? Like, what's going on here? For example, one lady, this is a real person. One lady is all about the hijab and taqwa, salah, do this, do that, etc., etc. And all of her children sell weed. Like, they have stores that sell marijuana because it's legal now. And if she knows this, right? And if you bring this up to her, she justifies it. How much taqwa does she really have? You see what I mean here? I'm not saying she's a terrible person. I'm not saying she has no taqwa. All I'm saying here is see through the outward symbols and understand that just because somebody outwardly is behaving in accordance to taqwa does not mean that they have taqwa in their hearts. And somebody who outwardly doesn't seem to have all the symbols of taqwa does not mean they could care less about Allah. You'll find some people who outwardly, there's nothing impressive, right? But when like backbiting comes up, when the real halal and haram comes up, you find that, no, there's a red line for this person, right? So the point here isn't to criticize people. The point here is to give us the tools and the skills to be able to see, to have more insight, right? And to have more perspective, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So what we want is a community that is more like the Prophet ﷺ, who does have the outward symbols, but it's also backed up with the inward realities. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he described himself, he didn't say, I'm the one who prays most and fasts most. He said, I am the one with the most taqwa, right here, and I am the most knowledgeable of Allah. You see, these are inward things. His outwardly actions are rooted and sourced in his inward taqwa. عليه الصلاة والسلام. باب تفاضل أهل الإيمان في الأعمال. Chapter on the reality that the people of Iman are at different levels in terms of their actions. عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال يدخل أهل الجنة الجنة وأهل النار النار ثم يقول الله تعالى أخرجوا من كان في قلبه مثقال حبة من خردل من إيمان فيخرجون منها قد اسودوا فيلقون في نهر الحياة فينبتون كما ينبت الحبة في جانب السيل ألم ترى أنها تخرج صفراء ملتوية. Here the Prophet ﷺ says, once the people of paradise enter paradise and the people of hellfire enter hellfire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, bring out from hellfire anybody who had an ounce worth of iman in their hearts. And they will come out of hellfire and they have been charred from the burning, and they will be put in a river called the river of life. And from there, their bodies will restore itself. The river of life will restore their bodies back to health, so to speak. What's the point here? What we're learning here about Iman is that Iman, people's Imans are at different levels. No two people are the same in their level of Iman. Just like no two people have the same fingerprints, right? Twins can look exactly the same, but apparently their fingerprints are different to that extent. Similarly, no two people are the same in their iman, even if they do exactly the same thing. They're different levels. And there are many reasons and causes for the variation, right? But you'll even find twins who have different levels of iman. It's truly, subhanAllah, it's crazy. Twins can have different levels of iman. Even though in mindset they're the same, they feel for each other, they think exactly the same, and they have the same upbringing, and they're always together, but they have these different levels of iman. Subhanallah. And what differs in terms of iman, number one, the actions. Clearly, somebody who prays 5 times a day has more iman than somebody who doesn't. Somebody who gives zakah and sadaqah is doing more and thus has more iman than somebody who only gives zakah. And even among the prophets, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ الرُّسُلُ فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Right? مِنْهُمْ مَنْ كَلَّمَ اللَّهُ وَرَفَعَ بَعْضَهُمْ دَرَجَاتٍ. These are the messengers Allah has favored some over the other. Some Allah has spoken to, like Musa alayhi salam, and others, and another, Allah raised him levels, meaning the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, انظر كيف فضلنا بعضهم على بعض. Look at how Allah has preferred some over others in this life. Whether that's in terms of iman or in terms of worldly possessions. People differ, right? And then Allah says, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ أَكْبَرُ دَرَجَاتٌ وَأَكْبَرُ تَفْضِيلًا. In the afterlife, there's still even more variation, more levels between people. And what this hadith is specifically showing us is that even from among the people of iman are those who will enter hellfire. Are those who will enter hellfire. Not everybody from the believing community will enter hellfire. Some will. What is that telling us? That clearly their level of iman in regards to their actions is not on par with those who made it to paradise without having to be purified in hellfire in the first place. Right? And what this hadith is specifically referring to is the action side. And we need to understand the context in which Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala is speaking. Remember, when I introduced this book, I mentioned that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, he is titling these units and these chapters in accordance to the questions and the conversations of his time. He is having a conversation with the people of his time and the issues of his time. And among the issues of his time is the group called the Murji'ah. Murji'ah, from the word arja'a, which means to postpone or to put aside, or to delay, right? Or to put behind. And essentially what this group did is to say that there is no varying levels of iman. Everybody's at the same level of iman. Anybody who says and believes La ilaha illallah is equal in terms of their levels of iman. Put differently, Abu Bakr and you are equal in iman according to them. According to them. That would be nice, right? Of course, we're not even close. Why did they say this? Because they looked at it from the angle of belief itself. Believing something. When you look at the sky and you say the sky is blue, right? Is my level of believing that the sky is blue different than your level of believing that the sky is blue? Can I say that I have more iman in the fact that the sky is blue than you? To them, in their mind, it's a type of factual thing. That's it. You believe it or you don't. And if you believe it, then there's no variation how much you can believe it. You either believe it or you don't. They saw it as black and white. So Imam Bukhari comes and says, that's not true. Here you have evidence that there are varying levels of iman, to the extent that some believers will end up in hellfire, and they are believers. Clearly, it's not random that they ended up in hellfire. And Allah doesn't just look at people and say, you know what, I'm just going to throw you in hellfire. It's not the way it works. There's a reason for it. There's an entire adjudication process. There's a day of judgment for this, right? So the fact that some believers end up in hellfire is evidence that there are varying levels of iman. And Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala specifically points to the fact that it is their actions that created that variety. Although in the hadith here, we just mentioned, actions aren't mentioned. All it mentions is that some people will be in paradise, some people will be in hellfire. And among the people in hellfire are believers who will come out of hellfire. But Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, he's telling us what got them to hellfire and what got the people of paradise to paradise. So if the Murji'ah say that belief in Allah is something that is factual, you either believe it or you don't, what they missed out is the fact that that belief is meant to influence your actions, right? It's meant to influence your actions. And so clearly somebody who does more actions for the sake of Allah has more iman in Allah than somebody who does less actions, even though they believe in Allah as well. To put differently, how much does my belief in Allah influence me? The fact that there are varying levels of influence tells us that there are varying levels of belief. Right? Also, the analogy that I gave you of the sky is tangible to us. We can see it. It is something that is truly factual, right? There is no room for doubt. And so maybe here we could say it's black and white. But Allah is not tangible to our senses. And so there must be variation how strong your belief is, right? Some people see Allah's presence in their life more than others. I'm not saying they see Allah with their senses, but they perceive Allah's presence through His qada and His qadar, through His answering of your dua, through His managing your life more than others. And if you see that, then naturally you will have a stronger belief of Allah's presence than somebody who cannot see that. Right? So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala is telling us that no, iman differs from people to person. And the Murji'ah are incorrect in the way they understand it. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين أنا نائم رأيت الناس يعرضون علي وعليهم قمص منها ما يبلغ الثدي ومنها ما دون ذلك وعرض علي عمر بن الخطاب وعليه قميص يجره قالوا فما أولت ذلك يا رسول الله قال الدين. So we're still in the same chapter, and this is the second evidence. Here the Prophet ﷺ is talking to the companions and saying that he saw a dream. And in that dream, he was seeing people. And what was the primary symbol of that dream was the clothing that these people are wearing. And he said different people had different levels or different amount of cloth that they were wearing. For some people, their clothing only covered their upper, like from the chest up. For some people, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And he says, I saw Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala an, and his garment was so long that it was dragging from behind him. It's just really long. I don't want to compare it to a wedding dress because that will give you the wrong image. But it was very long, right? So they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, what do you understand that to mean? He said, religiosity. Clothing in dreams symbolizes religiosity. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya bani Adam qad anzalna alaykum libasan yuwari sawatikum warisha. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O children of Adam, I've given you clothing to cover yourselves. In other words, one of the roles and functions of clothing is to cover your body so that everybody doesn't see it. And then Allah says, and also to beautify you. Clothing is part of humanity's beauty. Complete opposite of the West, that thinks that you're born, without clothing, and it's part of liberation, and you're more beautiful without clothing. That's just an adulteration of Iblis and the fitrah, right? In Islam, clothing is part of beautification. And then Allah continues the verse and says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. The garments of taqwa is even better. Meaning, your taqwa that influences your behaviors will provide you with a beautification that beautifies you more than your clothing itself, right? So somebody who has good akhlaq is seen as a beautiful person. Somebody who wears nice clothing is seen as a well-dressed person. Somebody who has good akhlaq is seen as a beautiful person. You see? So taqwa is a type of garment, not a visible one, but a garment that appears in your actions, that beautifies you and hides your faults, because we're all imperfect. So in dreams, clothing represents amount of taqwa and religiosity. The more clothing somebody is wearing, then the more iman that person really has, right? Like one person said that they saw Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala in a dream. Ibn Uthaymeen is a scholar who passed away the year 99 or 2000, very big from Saudi Arabia. And this person saw him in a dream and he was dragging his clothing. Like he has so much clothing on, it was so long that he was dragging it. Because he's a person of true iman. Somebody who their clothing is missing, right, is a sign of their iman is missing. Like there's a deficiency, severe deficiency in their iman. But this is only when clearly in the dream, like a focal point of the dream is the clothing. So not every time you see somebody wearing clothing, that's really what the dream is focusing on. Right? You have to feel that it's zeroing in on the clothing, right? So what's the point of this hadith in regards to the chapter? The point is the Prophet ﷺ saw people with varying level of clothing and therefore varying levels of iman. Not everybody is the same. Clearly, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala an had more iman than these other people, right? Let's see. Why don't we go ahead and stop here by the chapter of Al-Haya'u min al-Iman. Haya is part of iman. Wallahu ta'ala alam, sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. We stop at hadith number 23.